Yes, it's perfect now. We are on live.
All right.
Good evening, friends. I'm Dr. Rajashekharan. Just I'm checking whether everything is fine. Then we will start the session now. Good evening, professors and research scholars. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to this international webinar on narrative inquiry, a qualitative research focused on experience. Today we have eminent professor, researcher, and professor from Brazil, and she has done her bachelor's at languages, in master's at languages and literature. She has done her bachelor's in languages, master's at languages and literature, and PhD in linguistics, all degree from Federal University of Uberlândia in Brazil. Has been an international student at Brown University from 2004, Rhode Island College 2005, and Southern Illinois University 2013 in the USA. Has been teaching in public schools in 1999 and joined the staff of Federal Institute of Triangular Minerio in 2010. Most of her researching interest and publications are related to teaching English, comparative literature, teachers formation, and narrative inquiry. My dear friends, it's my great honor to introduce you, Dr. Gaisli Lima, to you. And she's a great friend of mine. I got the great honor to host her in the last year to my students also. This year I'm hosting her for international research webinar. And she'll be addressing on narrative inquiry, your research, qualitative research focused on experience. Gaisli Lima, now it's over to you. You can start the session.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Raj.
Gaisli, just a minute. Let me give two more instruction. Dear participants, you can listen all her talk, and during the question answer after her talk, we will have a question answer session. During the question answer session, as it is live, you can post the question in the chat box. I'll be reading the question on behalf of you, and she will be answering the question after the talk. Thank you. Over to you.
All right. So, first of all, I want to thank you, Professor Raj. It's our second interaction online. We've got the chance to meet each other in our TESOL community. It's a community for teachers and professors of teaching English and other languages. And I think we started the remote lives just way before the pandemic, COVID-19. So it was a great experience back then, and I'm sure today is going to be a good experience as well. It's pretty early here in Brazil. It's 7:40 a.m. But I'm very happy and energetic to share with you my experience as a researcher and to get to know more about your point of view of researching as qualitative research. So to start, I prepared some slides so we can go over them and just to organize our talk. I want to share with you I think I can do that. Yes, I can. I can also follow your comments during my talk in the chat box. So feel free to interact. So I'm Gisele Lima. I've finished and defended my thesis in 2016. And it was my experience about teaching English for a specific group of students. And my main object of study was my experience of teaching it in a collaborative way. So I was really interested in learning more, investigating more, how collaboration would be in my practice, because I wanted it to be. So it started from that, my experience with narrative inquiry. So before giving you more about my own experience as a researcher, I'm going to share with you what the conception of narrative inquiry. Just to make it clear what we are going to cover today, I just wrote a brief outline here. So I'm going to talk more about the conception of narrative inquiry as a theoretical and methodological conception and approach. The definition of experience, because experience is related to narrative inquiry. The professional's knowledge landscape, a teacher researcher, and here I use the hyphen because I consider it as one. So the teacher researcher as one person, one professional. The researching instruments, field and research texts, and meaning and interpretation. So we're going to go over these topics. So to start our talk, narrative inquiry is the study of experience understood narratively, okay? It's very common to, when we start searching about narrative inquiry, we also find the expression narrative research. Narrative inquiry is different from narrative research. And the difference is based mainly on narratives. Narrative research is a methodology which uses narratives, stories, to do researches. So it's very common in this conception of narrative research that the researcher gets a group of participants, they write their narratives or they talk about their stories. And the researcher gets this group of stories, this collection of narratives, sit down and analyze them, okay? Also, it's very common to have some studies that create a corpus, talking about corpus linguistics. So they create a corpus, and from the narratives, they even find the frequent or the frequency of some words, of expressions, and so on. That's narrative research. What I'm talking to you today is about narrative inquiry. And that's why I point and I highlight narratively. So it's another conception of investigating, but in a narrative way. So it's not only using narratives. Let's try to make it clear. Narrative inquiry is a conception, is a theoretical, methodological conception based on two Canadian researchers, John Clendening and Michael Connolly. This book that I have the cover there to show you is the base of our study when it comes to narrative inquiry. And as it's defined by the Canadian authors, the Canadian scholars, understanding experienced as lived and told stories, also known as narrative inquiry, has gained popularity and credence in qualitative research. Unlike more traditional methods, narrative inquiry successfully captures personal and human dimensions that cannot be quantified into dry facts and numerical data. This little text that I just read to you, it's a review by Amazon. So if you look for this book to buy it, you're gonna get this kind of review in Amazon. And I found it interesting to bring it to you because that's the main characteristic, the main feature of narrative inquiry, because we don't deal with the dry facts. We don't deal with numerical data. Even the narratives that we have during our researching period, these narratives, we analyze them considering our relation with the participant. So the narrative inquirer do not take for granted the participant. What I mean with that is that it's not just an individual, it's not just a number, it's not just a respondent, it's a participant. So when a participant tells the story, we analyze even the meaning of why the participant chose to tell that story. So when we talk about narrative inquiry in a qualitative approach of research, it's because the conception is based on lived and told stories. What it means. The told stories are the stories, the narratives that we remember from our past. And the lived stories are related to the experience we live at that moment of research. During my thesis, my research was based on a lived story or on lived stories because I described my relation with my students during that moment I was teaching and they were learning English in the classroom. So the told stories, they are related to the past situations. So when you recall some stories from the past, from the memory. So the definition of narrative inquiry is this, the lived and the told stories. Narrative inquiry is also very related to experience because we're talking about the stories. And the philosophical base for narrative inquiries is the conception of John Dewey's conception of experience. And I even chose one of his books, Experience and Education. So that's the base of any narrative inquirer to understand his conception. He was a North American philosopher, a teacher as well. And when it came to education, John Dewey had a very different approach of education that was really related to practice. So experience is defined by Dewey as a changing stream that is characterized by continuous interaction of human thought with our personal, social, and material environment. John Dewey had this conception of continuous interaction. So when we think of narrative inquiry, we cannot analyze or consider the research just by picking one narrative or just by choosing one story. So it's a continuous interaction. So we need more narratives, we need more stories. When we think of narrative research in that perception of experience, we have it in a tridimensional aspect. So it's in the present, but it's also in the past, and it also projects something to the future. So the narratives, they bring up all that movement, this tridimensional aspect as well. I'm talking too much about theory here. I'm going to try to illustrate it as well. Something that is pretty interesting because it's different from most research methodologies. While some methodologies, they work with hypothetical situations or hypotheses, the narrative inquiry don't expect that. So we don't use hypothetical or hypothesis to start our research. There are some specific terms used in narrative inquiry. And the first one, when we start research is the puzzle. Puzzle, yeah. I like when we think of the pieces of a puzzle. So the puzzle means that there is something that, or one situation that make us really wonder about that. So the puzzle is what we want to investigate, that we feel it's relevant to investigate. So that's the puzzle. As I mentioned, the collaboration and my experience as a teacher in in having a collaborative work with my students, that was my puzzle. So I wanted to know how, or if there was any kind of collaboration in my classroom while I was teaching. So that's the puzzle. And when I started, once I defined the puzzle, so that my experience as a teacher using collaborative work in the classroom, I started writing down my narratives about that. And what is pretty funny to point out is that my first narrative about this puzzle, I described what I really thought it was a collaborative class for my students. And once I brought that narrative to my study group, so other narrative inquirers, and I shared my narrative with them, and I just found out during this process of retelling my story that I wasn't collaborative at all. I even wrote down in the narrative very detailed how I was feeling happy to let my students choose the book to read during that semester. And I described that I wrote a list of book titles on the whiteboard. I even let them vote, and the book that got the most votes was the book chosen to be read by the entire group. That's not being collaborative because I didn't give them the chance to suggest the book titles. I didn't give them chance to choose another title different from those that the whole group elected. So that was my starting point to understand how important it was to write my narratives and to retell my stories. So I'm just pointing that because another typical term when it comes to narrative inquiry is tension, yeah, the tensions. And when we use the term tensions in narrative inquiry, it's kind of different of the regular meaning of tensions. So the tension is not what you really can point out or you can identify or verify. No. The tensions in the narrative inquiry is what is in between the facts, in between the narratives, in between the stories. So the tensions is what we can see happening meanwhile and in this gap. Okay, so I brought here a definition of Clendening, how she defines that, and she says that tensions draw our attention to the inquiry edges where we can learn most by staying awake to the bumping places, to places where we feel the dissonance, the uncertainty, the sense that something is not quite right, the places that call us to ask ourselves, was it happening here? So sometimes when the participant is writing the narrative, these tensions are not really clear for the participant. So during the time we started talking about that, so this movement from the field texts, and when I mean field texts, In this example, I'm talking about the stories, the narratives. From the field texts to the research texts, we have this movement of the interaction the researcher and the participant have talking about that story. And during this time, talking about that story, something is not being really clear. So that's what Clandini says when she talks about the uncertainty. So the narrative inquiry, we talk and we study a lot about the uncertainty, okay? And to have more detailed and examples about that, I suggest, I recommend you to choose and to read this article. It was written by 3 narrative inquirers. Dilma Mello, she was my advisor for my thesis, and she's the leader of our study group. And Sean Murphy and John Clandini, who are the Canadian scholars. So they together wrote this article, and they have examples of their daily life as researchers, as narrative inquirers, giving some examples about that. So I gave you some examples of myself, that I had in my thesis, but I also recommend you to read this article. Raj, could you please share that link of the references in the chat with the audience, please? I tried to do it here and I couldn't.
Which references?
The references. Let me see. I wrote all the references for you, so you could check it.
Have you sent me a mail?
Yeah, I shared with you. I think I get it here, Raj. Hold on.
Yeah.
It's a long link, but I think it's working. If you can check, please. So there you get a list of some references, and this text is also there, this article, all right?
Sure.
And I also brought other ones, other suggestions. So the first one that I have in this slide is John Clandini. She wrote about engaging in narrative inquiry. And John Clandini and most of the narrative inquirers, they're gonna emphasize, they're gonna highlight the importance of the engaging movement. Yeah. So the engagement is very important. So when I told you the relation between the researcher and the participant is pretty closer and different from other research methodologies, the narrative inquiry also emphasizes and motivates the teachers to become researchers. So that's a movement to go against the flow, because there are many research approaches that uses the teacher, or they have the teacher just as the subject or the object of study. So the idea of the narrative inquiry is to not only have the teacher as a participant, but also empowering the teacher to become a researcher. That was what happened to me. So when during my thesis, I analyzed my own practice, my own experience teaching. So I had this movement to analyze myself, and there is no way back. What it means that once I finished my thesis in 2016, I couldn't go back to just become a teacher or just to be a teacher. Yeah. So I had to keep going on that, because you get a wider vision of your own experience. And because you get more engaged in narrative inquiry, even the relation that I start having with my students after that is different. Yeah. So it's mostly when we talk about engaging, all right? The Handbook of Narrative Inquiry, the second cover, but I put it there for you. John Clandini is the editor, and each chapter was written by a scholar. I'm gonna point to like 2 different chapters because they were really important for me to understand. The handbook, it's a thick book. We also call it the Bible of narrative inquiry, because the idea of this selection of articles, the selection of texts are a way to map the methodology, to map where the narrative inquiry is. And there is a very interesting chapter where they point out that the narrative inquiry is a little bit in that fluid way, because it can converge, it can get into the same point on the same perspective of some methodologies, but also gets away from those as well. So I'm going to give you one example of that. When we think about the critical theory, yeah, it's mainly based in this Marxist way of analyzing the society. All right. According to that, through the critical theory, the meaning the individual has about a story, a situation, is based on the meaning that is constructed by that social group. When it comes to narrative inquiry, we understand that the meaning the individual, the participant, has about the story is not by a group or a social group construction. It's about himself or herself. So it's about the individual. So while the critical theory is going to analyze the object in a very broad and wider way, the narrative inquiry goes to the micro. Yeah, so it's the little spaces. So it's to the individual. So that's one different aspect. So I'm just pointing out that because we can, from this book, the Handbook of Narrative Inquiry, we can figure out where this conception of research is located, can be really pointed. And the third cover, it's the teacher's professional knowledge landscapes. For me, that was a very important book because Clandini and Connolly explain better, and they give really good reasons to make it worthy all the professional, all the practice the teachers have in their local situations. So when they talk about the landscape, it's the idea to consider the contexts the teachers work on. So when we talk about practice, and that's what I meant by saying the importance of teachers getting engaged in narrative inquiry and becoming researchers as well. Because I don't know if it's the same situation in India, but here in Brazil, most public school teachers, they work a lot. They work hard, long hours, and most of them don't have the time to publish papers. So they don't write about their own experiences, about their own findings in the classrooms. They don't. So all these theoretical and the scientific academic aspects of teaching are related to other kind of professionals. And sometimes this kind of professionals, they do not consider, or they don't have the experience of these landscapes that these teachers are part of. So reading more about the teacher's professional knowledge, we also get to know that when it comes to teacher education, to be forming a professional, we know that we don't learn everything at university. We don't learn everything from the books. But most of this teacher education happens during practice. So they find out more about that. They get deeper in different subjects. One example of that, during all my period, during all my time of formation, of academical education, from bachelor, master's, and PhD, I didn't have any specific topic or subject to talk about inclusion or how to work with the students who had any kind of deficiency or handicapped students and so on. I've never had that. I've learned how to deal with this kind of students, about the inclusion of these students in education by my practice. So that's what I'm telling you. The importance of make it worth it and giving more light and attention to the professional knowledge that the teachers build up during their career, during their practice. And I also point out some additional reading. I bring here one that is pretty interesting, because if I'm telling you that narrative inquirers have a different relation with the participant, we're gonna have to discuss the ethical aspects of this relation. So the relational ethics of narrative inquiry. One of the topics that we constantly are discussing in our study group is how building the meaning or composing the meaning of a story has to be an interaction between the researcher and the participant. I also got to you the second cover on writing qualitative research, living by words, by Ali, Vance, Downey, and Anzu. That's our reference when it comes to the composition of meaning. So after we get the field texts and the research texts, the analysis of that or of those come from this book, the reference these authors gave us. And these authors mainly tell us that one story may have different meanings. And as a researcher, I need, as an ethical aspect, I need to show and I need to register that in my research, the different meanings that the same story has. So it's very common after you write an analysis, bring this analysis to the participant, so the participant approves, or if the participant doesn't agree, you get his own meaning of the story, and the researcher writes down the meaning that he thinks is the conception there. So in that way, the work just give the space or give the room for these different meanings the same story has. One of the questions that always pop up when we are talking about the narrative inquiries. But wait, so how we're gonna know it's right? Yeah, the interpretation is right, the meaning is right. And we always reply is what is right? Yeah. So we do not consider having just one truth, or I mean, just one version of truth, because the truth changes once we change the perspective. So the meaning changes once we change the person who is interpreting that. So this relation that we, as narrative inquirers, we build up with the participant go through this ethical aspect as well. So we need to respect and we need to give a voice to the interpretation the participant has about his own story. Most of the time during this interaction, the participant also learn more about that. As I gave you my first example about myself, when I first wrote the story about my experience using collaborative work during my English classes, because I wanted to choose a book with my students. When I first wrote the story, the meaning I had there was that, wow, that was me being collaborative. And during the time I was interacting with the other readers, with my study groups, other researchers, and they pointed out, Gisele, you weren't collaborative. It wasn't collaboration. It changed my mind about the meaning I had before. So during this relation between researcher and participant, these changes may happen. May happen. I'm using may because sometimes it doesn't happen. But the idea is that the meaning is built up during this relation between researcher and participants. So where do we go next? How do we get there to this kind of qualitative research and this interaction with our participants? We get there once we want to go further in this kind of relation. Yeah. When we understand that to talk about qualitative research is more than just having one version of the story or just having one interpretation of the story. So, how to get there? The idea is having that first step, that changing step of yourself as a researcher, and also to understand that there is a big group of researchers already working harder to show the good results that come out from the narrative inquiry. And as I mentioned before as well, moving, teaching, researching forward is when we come to the teachers who are working in their classrooms and empowering them and showing them how important their knowledge, their professional knowledge is when it comes to researching. And the idea that the teachers just sometimes don't feel safe. When I mean safe in the idea of they don't want to be criticized, they don't want to put themselves in the situation that they've been analyzed by someone. And becoming a researcher or a teacher researcher, it means that you know that you are not completed as a professional, that as a teacher you have limitations as any other kind of professional. When the teacher gets to that safe zone, to that safe space to share the limitations, their concerns, talking about profession, and and he can also join a community to talk about that, ask for help, or exchange ideas and suggestions. That's a way to move forward teaching, researching. So I guess we've been doing very little towards that, but I can really be sure to tell you that we've been moving, although it's slow, but we've been moving. I think, I don't know the Indian culture, but here the Brazilian culture still thinks that the teacher is the center of all knowledge. Yeah, the wise professional that knows everything. I think this conception is being worked on. The idea is to deconstruct that. The idea is to destroy that conception, because that conception is make the teachers become very sick. Yeah, because we have our limitations and we need to keep to move forward, to grow up as professional once we recognize and accept our limitations and work in that sense. And the advantages of the narrative inquiry is that it's possible for the teacher researcher to develop the skills to relate instruction to people, culture, and social practices. And I just point out here of rural the communities, because Sean Murphy, one of the references I showed you, he has a very interesting article about his experience working with rural schools. So it's important to value pupils' local knowledge and community resources, learn from diverse perspectives and experience of their peers. And that's why I mentioned that the teachers also created this space, this safe space, a community to share among the peers or the colleagues. And also the students, when the teacher takes that movement, the students also change and they get into another level of interaction between teaching and learning process. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience, my own research. I just brought two to talk to you about, and the first one was about autism. Mateus and Mateus, we got a grant. This was a funded research. And during 1 year, Mateus and I researched about autism. Mateus came to my classroom in the first semester, so he was a freshman, and I was teaching English to the group, and Mateus got enrolled to the class. And I found out during our first teachers meeting that he had the diagnosis of autism. And I couldn't relate like the name and the diagnosis. And when I said, well, I taught the group and I didn't see anyone with the characteristics of autism. Well, I found out that I didn't know the characteristics of autism. I didn't. As I told you, I didn't have the knowledge from the academic classes that I had before. And during this semester, it was a semester, during this semester, I got really puzzled by having a student with autism in my group, puzzled. And as a narrative inquirer, I wanted to research that. How could I teach English to a guy who had autism? And Mateus and I started that research. And first of all, we started having conversations. And it was one of the topics of my presentation, talking about the instruments. Conversation is one of the instruments of narrative inquiry. And during our conversations, I found out that Mateus was older than his classmates. He was already 22, 23 years old. I found out that he had a horrible, horrible and traumatic experience in his previous course that he enrolled, and he was bullied, and he had lots of problems with that, and he just gave up on the course, and that he was trying once again at that moment with me. And during the research we've done, we used as instruments the conversation. We used, and Mateus was also a researcher. He wasn't just the participant. He was a researcher, and he was researching about he was investigating his own experience as an autist student in an English class. So we used the conversation, we used pictures. So Mateus went back to his story. Back then, he chose which pictures and which moments of his past life he wanted to share for this research. So when he found out about the diagnosis, when he had his first experiences learning English, so we used the photos, we used the narratives because he wrote down these stories, and we even used the interview, because we created a structured interview to interview his psychiatrist and also his mother. So we had plenty of research, of field texts, and we needed to make that into research. And one of the ideas and the suggestions that Ellie, Vance, and Danzu give us, Raj, I want to share another window. I don't know if people can see. Can you see my other window?
Let me check.
Or not?
Oh, I am seeing only your own research experience window.
Can you see? No, it's another one. Let me just change. I want to show you this because this is how Mateus found out an interpretation of these field texts, and that's a way to show
You
you.
can, yes, yes, you can
Yeah,
minimize
I'm
that,
gonna
and again,
show.
you can do that. Yes.
So yeah, this one. Opa, sorry.
No issue.
This one. Yeah. Can you see now?
Yes, 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 I'm seeing it.
Yeah. So from all the narratives, the pictures, and the interviews, Mateus wanted to interpret that and giving a meaning to that by drawing. So he drew some of the tensions that we found, that we understood were there in his stories. So he found tension during the interviews, he found tension during the diagnosis, and we even came out, one of the results that came out from our research is that he doesn't have autism. He has other kind of psychosis, but he doesn't consider that autism. So his interest in nature and how he ended up doing and becoming a professional in IT area. So he was my student in this IT course. Even when it came into learning English, he even interpreted it like from music and even from programming, because he worked specifically with that. So I wanted to show you the images, the drawings, because the drawings are also a way of interpreting the interpreting the stories and giving meaning to the stories. And another example, and I'm going to make it shorter, is the latest research we are going to publish soon. It's about an international exchanging student. I have a couple, but this specific one, she's from Gabon, Gabon in Africa, and she has been here in Uberlândia for her undergraduate course in marketing. And what narrative inquiry help the researcher and the participant find out is even the stories that were untold. And from this work that I have with Maela, the exchanging student, she just found out the stories about the women in her own family and the women from Gabon because of the research. So how the women get a profession, and the profession even abroad in her case, coming from a country that is a small country that has lots of issues when it comes to the profession, women becoming professionals. So the stories that are told in these two ways, in these two aspects, the lived stories and the told stories, also pointed out some sacred narratives, some hidden narratives, and Maela and I found out that in our research. So that was mostly what I wanted to point out, and now I want to answer the questions. I think it's going to be better that way. I hope you understood a little bit about it, and if you didn't, we can talk now, and Professor Raj can help me selecting some of your questions.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful, very neat presentation. I would rate it, because anyone, those who have not any idea about narrative inquiry, could have understood all the entire concept, and it's absolutely fantastic. Even I had a kind of a little bit apprehension about how the people would take it, but the way you took it, it was wonderful and awesome. Okay, dear participants, now you can post the questions in the chat box. Probably, I'll definitely see. Will answer the question. Yeah, you can post your questions in the chat box.
All right.
Yeah, already people were very happy about they have started giving good feedbacks. Participants, if you have a question, please, you can throw the questions into the chat box. The feedback form will be shared at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, just now I'm getting to read the comments here.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Sanjita Jolie, we should be changed by the time for coming future. That's interesting to point to that, because school hasn't changed much if we consider like from the past century to now. And I guess the pandemic time forced us to make a movement of change. And as we weren't really prepared to that, we've been having really traumatic experiences, I can say. So taking a move of change from qualitative research can also help that, can help the teachers figure out the best way to teach, the schools, the best way to structure. The reference I shared with you, mainly Sean Murphy, he has really good work, academic work, which point to the importance of a flexible curriculum. So having a flexible curriculum, making sure that the students' values are not neglected or not rejected is a very important movement to that change. I agree with you for the coming future.
Cicely, and I have a question. Do you consider that after this pandemic, probably even we are also severely affected in Brazil and all over the world? Do you feel that we'll have so much of corpuses to do a narrative inquiry after the COVID-19? And what type of thing? Because do you consider this if everyone will share similar experiences, or do you advise to have a different narrative inquiries in the different parts of the world?
Yeah, that's a good point because we've been pandemic COVID-19 is happening worldwide, but our experiences to that they are different, and you know the stories they can't be neglected. Um, I have this kind of I always speak up. Uh, Towards that idea of different experiences and different stories. I am a mom of a 3-year-old boy. Professor Raj, can you imagine what it is to work remotely, working
Yes.
from my house with a 3-year-old boy around everywhere, and a 3-year-old boy that needs my attention? So it's very distinct experience of having working moms, working researchers, mom researchers, parenting. Let's put it in male as well, yeah? Parenting researchers, and during this pandemic time, compared to the experience that other kind of professional have. That's what I mean, as you said, the experience is different. Although we have the same problem, COVID-19, the stories are different, the experiences are different. But I don't know if this question came out there. What makes it worth it to study individual experiences once it's so distinct, it's so different? Um, while we are analyzing an individual story, that story makes a bridge. Yeah, it has a bridge into other stories. So while I'm telling my own stories, my own story, looking for becoming a more collaborative teacher, somebody else is reading my experience can say, hey, I'm going through the same puzzle. I want to know more about that. I want to learn more about Giselle's experience. So the idea is that we don't have a standard experience, but from
Yes, yes,
telling the individual experience, we build this bridge to the other person reflect, to
yes.
wonder about its own.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to. The young researcher, please kindly make a note of it. Whenever you want to do that kind of qualitative inquiry, you can do that because each experience is specific. You know, it is special and distinct, as usually mentioned. And do you have any other questions from the participant side? Okay, let me ask one more question. Then, if anything else, I
Mhm.
did come. Why people are very, the qualitative research methodology? Why people are choosing very limited? Because why most of them go to the quantitative based research than qualitative?
Well, I think there are different reasons of research as well. I think there are different motivations for research. What I mean by that, we we are experienced researchers here. We're talking about that. We even know when we get funded research, something is being motivated to be investigated. It happens a lot here in Brazil. For example, if they want to prove that we can have another version or another plant to make ethanol from. Ethanol is a kind of gas for cars. So it's mainly from sugar cane. And now there is another kind of plant, sorghum, that is, so there are lots of fund, when I mean lots of money, okay? Lots of money to fund researchers who want to investigate the use of sorghum into creating or producing ethanol for cars. And when it comes to education, Raj, when it comes to teaching English, who is funding our research? Who is funding? Yeah. So if I get even the topic of our researches, they must be appealing. They must call the attention of these fundraisers. Yeah. So when it comes to inclusion, that was the research I had with Mateus. I didn't think we would get money. I wouldn't think we would get him a scholarship during a year to research that. But right now, this kind of inclusive education here in Brazil is a big problem because the schools are not ready to receive this kind of students. The teachers are not ready to teach them. So we've been having this kind of fund for that. So we got Mateus a scholarship. The same thing for Maella. I was like, it's going to be hard to get Maella a scholarship. Who is going to pay a 12-month research about Africa? And because Maella came here from a kind of exchanging program, government exchanging program, we found out the way to get her a scholarship as well. So that's what I mean, Raj. It's all the motivation of that. As I've been working, all my experience of researching is in education, is in applied linguistics. I can tell you that we get less fundraisers than engineering and biomedical researchers. Because the importance the society gives is different. Yeah?
Yes.
So I'm not saying that or blaming the engineering or the biomedical. I'm not blaming. I'm just saying.
No, actually, it's real fact.
It gives different importance.
The reason is when I attended the TESOL 2019 conference, most of the English teachers, even in US, they were lamenting about their pay scale because they were not equally paid as engineering teachers. This kind of some kind of differences are there all over the world. As you write in the same thing in the research also, they think that is more practical than our research. That kind of thing is there. Absolutely, you're perfectly correct. Cicely, thank you very much. It was a wonderful session. As Biswajit Mohanta says, impressive, inspiring, and imposing an intense deliberation, madam. That's what perfect word. Thank you, Mr. Biswajit Mohanta, and all other participants. Thank you very much. And I think it was a very nice session. I wholeheartedly thank all the participants on behalf of School of Social Sciences and Languages, VIT Chennai. And I thank Cicely Lima. Thank you very much. And as we have she is very close of mine, and we used to interact regularly, and it was a wonderful session. It is the one of the best I would definitely rate, and you did it in a very, very neat and such a subtle way you have presented, and very impressive. Thank you very much. And dear participants, all this presentation will be available in the same YouTube channel after some time. Also, you can watch it. Thank you very much. And you wait for some participants. Please, you wait for some instruction. Let me thank Cicely for her wonderful interaction and the presentation. Thank you, Cicely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Professor Raj.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, dear participants, just wait. I'll be sharing the feedback form, and you can do that thing. And thank you, Cicely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just give me 2 minutes. I'll be sharing the feedback form. Dear participant, just I'm sharing the feedback form. Dear participants, and thank you very much. And I have said, oh, it doesn't accept. Just a minute. Let me check. Let me check. Just I'm checking the feedback. Just to wait. And somebody has posted that it is not accepting. Let me verify. Check now. Dear participant, check and update me. Check now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your participation. You will receive a certificate within 2 days. And one more thing, feedback form link will be open only for another 15 minutes. It will be closed at 5:30. Please try to fill it up before 5:30. Thank you very much. I'll meet you in the another webinar, research webinar, and have a good day. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.